In the year 2233, the USS Kelvin of the Starfleet was investigating a storm incident on the fringe of the Federation territory, only to discover upon arrival that the storm was caused by a black hole. Before they could react, a massive Romulan warship appeared, several hundred times larger than the Federation starship. Utilizing advanced weaponry, the Romulans launched a deadly attack on the Kelvin, disabling its shields, damaging the warp engine, and severing the weapon systems. With the Kelvin powerless, the crew was forced to abandon ship. Just then, the Romulans demanded that the captain of the Kelvin come aboard the Narada to negotiate a ceasefire. For the safety of his crew, the captain agreed to their terms and handed command of the Kelvin over to his first officer, George Kirk. The captain ordered George that if he did not respond within 15 minutes, he should evacuate the ship immediately. Upon arriving at the Narada, the Romulans immediately questioned the captain about the ship he was on and the whereabouts of Ambassador Spock. The captain did not recognize Ambassador Spock. They then asked the captain what year it was in the new calendar, and after he answered, the Romulan leader fatally stabbed him. Simultaneously, the Kelvin received news of the captain's death. George ordered all crew to escape via life pods, including his pregnant wife. He set a collision course with the Narada, but with the auto-navigation offline, he had to manually steer the ship to ensure the safety of the crew escaping. His wife gave birth to a boy in the escape pod, and in his final moments, George heard his son's cry but would never meet him. He named the boy James, remaining forever in the depths of space. 10 years later, in Iowa on Earth, a young boy recklessly drove an antique car on the highway, with his mother not on Earth and his stepfather unable to control him. A mechanical police officer pursued him. The boy turned towards a quarry, and eventually, the car fell off a cliff, but the boy jumped out just in time. When the police officer asked his name, he disdainfully said he was James Kirk. Meanwhile, on the planet Vulcan, young Spock was enduring taunts from his peers about his mixed heritage. They mocked his human mother, which was their 35th attempt to elicit an emotional response from him. This time, they went too far, insulting his mother, and Spock retaliated fiercely, disappointing his father who reprimanded him for his lack of emotional control. As Vulcans are a species unaffected by emotions, his father told Spock that he could choose his own destiny. As Spock grew up, he stood at the Kaliner ceremony, which would determine his future. His mother had told him she would be proud of him, no matter what decisions he made. The elders were pleased with Spock's performance, granting him a spot in the Vulcan expedition team, but his decision to also apply to Starfleet displeased them. Spock explained that preparing multiple options was logical, but the elders told him it was unnecessary, though they still decided to accept him, despite what they deemed imperfections, his human mother. This touched a raw nerve for Spock, leading him to decline joining the Vulcan expedition team and deciding to enter Starfleet instead. Meanwhile, at a bar in Iowa, a drunken James got into a fight with Starfleet cadets over flirting, holding his own against 5 opponents but getting beaten up badly. Captain Pike intervened, and upon learning that James was George's son, tried to persuade him to join Starfleet. James was initially dismissive, but Pike mentioned how his father had saved 800 lives under 12 minutes of command. He believed James could become an officer in 4 years and command his own starship in 8, but James remained indifferent. Before leaving, Pike told him the registration location. The next day, James arrived at the Riverside shipyard, where the still under construction Enterprise awaited. He boarded the shuttle for new cadets. Surprisingly, Uhura, whom he had met at the bar the previous night, was also a recruit, along with another new recruit, McCoy, who was reluctant to join Starfleet. After some mutual complaining, they became friends and started their less than pleasurable space journey together. 3 years later, the Romulans were still waiting near the black hole for Ambassador Spock. After a 25-year-long wait, they finally captured a small spaceship that appeared. At Starfleet Academy, the cadets were undergoing the second phase of testing. James approached the exams casually and successfully completed the simulation, but Spock accused him of cheating and brought him before the Federation Council. James defended his actions, but just then, the Council received a distress signal from Vulcan, abruptly ending the hearing. With Starfleet's main fleet on a distant mission in the Laurentian system, the fleet had no choice but to send the cadets on a rescue mission immediately. The cadets were assigned to different starships based on their abilities, with the top students, including Spock and Uhura, assigned to the new Enterprise. However, James was not allowed to board any starship until the Council's decision. McCoy ingeniously injected him with a vaccine that put his body in a critical condition, allowing him, as a medical officer, to take his patient aboard the Enterprise. Starfleet was ready to warp to Vulcan, but the Enterprise's helmsman, Sulu, caused a mishap due to unfamiliarity with the control panel. Encouraged by his teammates, he eventually managed to launch the ship successfully. the Enterprise received another distress call from Vulcan, indicating a massive storm above the planet, similar to the one the Kelvin encountered 25 years earlier, a trap set by the Romulans. James rushed to inform Captain Pike, who was initially skeptical but convinced after Uhura received a distress call. Spock concluded that James's logic was correct. As the Enterprise entered Vulcan's orbit, they were stunned to find 7 Starfleet vessels destroyed by the Romulans. The isolated Enterprise was vulnerable to attack, with shields quickly dropping to 32%. As they prepared to fire again, the Romulan leader recognized the Enterprise and immediately ordered a ceasefire. They contacted the Enterprise and greeted Spock warmly, but Spock did not recognize him. The Romulan leader only left a cryptic message and ordered Captain Pike to come aboard the Narada for negotiations. Echoing the situation the Kelvin faced 25 years earlier, Pike took several hand-to-hand combat-trained crew members, including James, with him. Meanwhile, he left the Enterprise in Spock's charge. As the captain headed to the Narada, he sent James and his team towards Vulcan, dropping them on a Romulan drilling platform. The platform had drilled a huge vertical shaft into Vulcan's surface, and the drilling beam interference blocked all communications and transporter beams. James and his team had to disable the platform for the Enterprise to establish contact with Starfleet. During the descent, Sulu and James successfully landed on the platform, but another overly excited team member fell off the platform and was instantly incinerated by the beam. James and Sulu engaged in a fierce battle with the Romulans, eventually defeating them and sabotaging the drilling platform. Meanwhile, the Romulans deployed red matter on Vulcan, creating a black hole at the planet's core that would destroy the planet within minutes. As the platform collapsed, Sulu accidentally fell, and James jumped after him, catching him and activating a parachute. However, unable to bear the weight of 2 people, the parachute detached. At the crucial moment, the Enterprise successfully beamed them back aboard. After James and Sulu were transported back to the ship, Spock beamed down to Vulcan's surface, attempting to save the Elders, including his parents. But as they were about to transport, the ground collapsed, and his mother failed to be beamed back. Spock recorded in the ship's log that over 6 billion Vulcans died, with less than 10,000 surviving. Vulcans became an endangered species, and Captain Pike became a prisoner of the Romulans. The Romulan leader threatened Pike to hand over Earth's defense codes, but Pike steadfastly refused. The leader recounted his past, explaining that in his era, the Narada was a mining ship. He had struggled to support himself and his pregnant wife, which is how he survived. He also blamed Starfleet for watching as Romulus was destroyed, but Pike remembered that Romulus had not been destroyed and was still intact. Nero's claims were merely projections of a possible future. Nero knew that the destruction of Romulus could not be reversed, and his goal was to destroy every Federation planet. He extracted the Earth's defense codes from Pike's brain using an iridium worm. Meanwhile, the Enterprise detected the Narada's course heading towards Earth. Based on their red matter black hole technology, it was confirmed that the Narada came from the future. Spock believed that the Enterprise needed to join forces with Starfleet, but James insisted they must catch up with the Narada first. Any delay would lead to Earth's destruction, leading to a heated argument between them. Spock had to use a Vulcan nerve pinch to end the dispute, and James was confined to an escape pod, which was launched towards a cold, icy planet, Delta Vega, part of the Vulcan star system. On this icy world, James was chased by a polar bear, which was then devoured by an even larger monster. After a fierce chase, James took refuge in a cave. At a critical moment, an old man with a torch drove away the monster, claiming to be Spock, which James found hard to believe since he was exiled by Spock himself. However, the older Spock transferred his memories to James. In a future 129 years later, a supernova was about to destroy, threatening the entire galaxy. With Romulus in close proximity, Spock agreed to help save Romulus. So they developed a red substance that could form a black hole to absorb the supernova material. However, the supernova exploded sooner than expected, and Spock was unable to prevent it, leading to the destruction of Romulus. To prevent further damage, Spock deployed the red matter, but on his way back, he was intercepted by the Narada. Nero blamed everything on Spock. Meanwhile, both the Narada and Spock's ship were swallowed by the black hole. The Narada arrived in another timeline first, encountering the Kelvin. After destroying the Kelvin, they waited 25 years until Spock's ship appeared. But for Spock, it was only a few seconds late. Nero captured Spock and imprisoned him on Delta Vega to witness Vulcan's destruction. Their appearance disrupted the original timeline, and the older Spock told James that in another timeline, his father was safe. Later, the older Spock led James to the brilliant engineer Scotty, who had a way to return them to the Enterprise. Before leaving, the older Spock advised James that he needed to provoke Spock to remove him from command. according to Starfleet regulations, they used technical means to return to the Enterprise. James questioned Spock about his lack of anger over the planet's destruction and his mother's death. James's relentless verbal attacks completely angered Spock. Spock violated Starfleet regulations and had to hand over control of the Enterprise to James. Once Spock calmed down, he told his father that he couldn't control his emotions over his mother's death. With his father's guidance, he understood James's actions. Meanwhile, they discovered the Narada near Saturn's orbit, and the Enterprise could rely on Titan's magnetic field for protection, remaining undetected by the Narada. At this time, Spock returned to the bridge and suggested using the transporter to steal the black hole device from the Narada. The two successfully transported to the Narada, where chaos ensued. After a fierce battle, they broke through, and Spock used his sensory abilities to locate the black hole device in Captain Pike's position. Meanwhile, a drilling platform opened above the Golden Gate Bridge, causing severe earthquakes. Spock controlled the ship with the black hole device, while James went to the prison to rescue Captain Pike. Nero and Io were waiting for him there. Meanwhile, Spock destroyed the drilling platform. Enraged, Nero wanted to kill Spock and launched dozens of torpedoes at him. At a critical moment, Spock activated warp speed to escape, and the Narada also activated warp speed to pursue, with the Enterprise following them and launching indiscriminate attacks. James managed to escape Isle's entanglement and successfully rescued Captain Pike. Spock used the black hole device to crash into the Narada. In the moment the ship was destroyed, the three were successfully transported back to the Enterprise. The Narada was swallowed by the black hole. James suggested saving the Romulans, but Nero refused, preferring to see Romulus destroyed rather than accepting their help. The Enterprise fired photon torpedoes, destroying the Narada while the black hole engulfed them. However, the black hole's gravity pulled the Enterprise, and the warp engines malfunctioned. Finally, Scotty threw the warp core near the black hole, and the explosion's shockwave pushed the Enterprise out of the gravitational field. Eventually, James officially became the captain of the Enterprise. The older Spock bid farewell to his younger self, deciding to help the remaining Vulcans establish a new colony. Young Spock also returned to the Enterprise.